I have to make all these excuses for her. This, like I said, all this was this week was people who said, "Oh, she ran a flawless campaign. How ridiculous!" Or it's sexism, it's racism. This is an old playbook.
Yes, I didn't say any of those things.
I know, but I've heard a lot of these things, and I think America's perfectly willing to elect a woman. They just didn't like the last two that were put up.
The vice president to Joe Biden, whether it was a male, female, black, white, or anything else, was going to have a giant political albatross around their neck, and they could perform perfectly or perform imperfectly. But that person was going to be at a disadvantage.
She didn't make a good case. Well, she didn't denounce the past stuff that people didn't like. She just tried to ignore it.
I've been on that MSNBC, mate. It was propagandist nutcrackery on there. I went on a show called Morning Joe. It was absurd the way they carried on.
Good Morning Joe.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know what it was. It wasn't morning. There was no one called Joe there. No one could concentrate. They didn't understand the basic tenets of journalism. No one was willing to stick up for genuine American heroes.
Bill Maher isn't holding back, and people online can't get enough of it. He's taking apart the same old arguments from MSNBC's woke guests, leaving them struggling to keep up. At this point, MSNBC might need to rethink whether Maher's show is the right place for them, because the takedowns are getting downright brutal. So, who was in the hot seat this time? And what did Maher say that left them scrambling for a response? We've got all the details right here. Stick with us as we break it all down. But before we jump in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more must-watch clips.
I also think everything the candidates, especially the Democrats, do to get voters annoys them. The constant texting. Did you get the texts from Tim Walz every 5 minutes, and always begging for money and knocking on doors? We've got people knocking on doors. People don't want knocking on your door. Who in this day and age wants someone knocking on? Kids don't even like it when a phone call. That's like too much of a invasion of their privacy.
Bill Maher expertly called out the hypocrisy in MSNBC's John Heileman's argument. Heileman claimed Kamala Harris lost the election because her message didn't reach the right audience. But Maher pointed out the real problem. It wasn't the message, it was the medium. Democrats stuck to legacy media outlets like MSNBC and CNN, preaching to an audience that was already on their side. Meanwhile, Trump expanded his reach by appearing on more neutral platforms like Joe Rogan's podcast and Theo Von's show, tapping into a much wider crowd. When the traditional media strategy failed, Democrats didn't adapt. Instead, they pushed even harder, flooding people with mass texts and even showing up at their doors, crossing personal boundaries. Rather than meeting voters where they actually were, they doubled down on outdated tactics, ultimately driving people away.
Who might emerge as the strongest Democratic opposition leader in the next Trump era? Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, like Adam Schiff, he won right big.
He won big. I like Westmore.
Westmore's fantastic. He's in Maryland.
Yep.
But who's going to be the one? Gavin Newsom we have here in this state. He's already called the legislature to. Trump hasn't done anything yet, but I understand the.
This was the problem. There was a 2014 study that showed that Fortune 500 companies were more likely to pick a female CEO if the company was struggling, basically setting women up for the big job, but to also fail. If they did well, fine. But if they failed, look, we have a female CEO while failing. And that's what I feel like they did to Kamala Harris. When Biden refused to step aside and not run again, he was supposed to be that bridge. He backed off on that promise due to arrogance. And then he drops out after a catastrophic debate performance, and they set Kamala Harris up to fail.
What is this writer even saying? The Democrats had their message locked in. All Kamala Harris had to do was amplify it, and everything would supposedly fall into place. But here's what they don't get. Americans aren't easily swayed by polished speeches and campaign slogans. They don't just listen. They look around at their own lives. Soaring inflation, rising crime, an unsecured border. These weren't just political talking points, they were everyday struggles. Voters weren't buying what the Democrats were selling because their reality didn't match the party's messaging. Even if Biden had been at his sharpest mentally, it wouldn't have changed a thing. The issue wasn't just who was delivering the message, it was the message itself. And by the time Democrats realized it, voters had already tuned them out.
They set Kamala Harris up to fail. That was a 3-month campaign, and she was supposed to introduce herself to the American people. No wonder people were Googling, did Joe Biden drop out?
No. No. You're saying 3 months wasn't long enough?
I mean,
It was too long.
It was long enough.
It was long enough.
if they had
There's
a
a different-
primary,
Shit, it's not that they didn't have time to introduce. They met someone and didn't like them.
Once again, Bill Maher hits the nail on the head. It's not that the Democrats didn't have strong candidates to replace Joe Biden. They did. As Michael Douglas later pointed out on the show, the party has a deep bench of experienced governors, senators, and rising stars who were more than capable of stepping up. So why didn't they choose one of them? Because they were too focused on identity politics instead of merit and leadership. Rather than prioritizing competence and vision, they obsessed over optics. They calculated that picking a black woman as vice president would lock in support from both women and black voters. But politics isn't just about diversity, it's about delivering real solutions. Voters don't just want representation, they want leaders who can actually fix problems. By prioritizing symbolism over substance, Democrats underestimated the electorate. They assumed identity alone would win people over, but voters saw through it. The choice felt performative rather than genuine, and in the end, it wasn't enough to build trust or secure victory. That miscalculation is a big reason they're now facing serious political backlash.
The sitting vice president, and you get put on elevated to the top of the ticket 107 days ahead of the election. I think that is a very high degree of difficulty put on anybody, and I do not think she is the perfect candidate. I tend to agree with Sarah that probably in a fully litigated primary, she probably would not have been the Democratic nominee, but we'll never know that. But I will tell you that, there's never been anybody who's had the difficulty of that situation, elevated that late in the campaign. Why?
Democrat would have needed to run away from
Bill,
the
I don't know
Biden
if you know this, but the vice president of the United States is basically shoved in a broom closet for 3.5 years.
I know.
You couldn't.
She was more popular in there.
Yes, well.
I mean, this idea that in a mass media age, that 107 days is not long enough to know somebody?
You are way overestimating the American people in terms of what their ability.
Hold up. This is exactly the kind of thinking that got the Democrats into trouble in the first place, underestimating the American people. MSNBC's John Heilemann actually argued that Bill Maher was giving voters too much credit when he said 3 months was more than enough time to make up their minds. Really? That's how the woke left sees Americans, as if we're incapable of critical thinking or making informed decisions? No wonder one MSNBC anchor even had the nerve to claim that Americans don't know what they want. Newsflash, we absolutely do. And it's definitely not a puppet who blindly follows the whims of the woke left. Americans aren't looking for leaders who talk down to them. We want leaders who respect our intelligence, understand real struggles, and actually fight for our interests. The left can keep underestimating the American people, but when election time comes, they'll find out the hard way that voters know exactly what they want, and they're not afraid to show it at the ballot box. Now, let's roll. The clip.
Donald Trump has become a universally known, understood, loved by some, hated by others over the course of being omnipresent for 8 years.
Okay.
Barack Obama becomes president of the United States after running for 2 years as president, runs a 50-state primary, is on television, does dozens of Democratic debates, and by the time at the end of that, most people knew who he was. Most people.
Yeah.
You drop somebody into the middle of the top of the ticket, 3 days out, 3 months out. You are going to have to spend a lot of time trying to introduce yourself to the country while also being in a steel cage death match with Donald Trump.
Okay, but I don't know if you ever watched this show, but I had Michael Douglas on this week.
Yeah.
At the top, we were talking about this, and he made a very good point that every other country in the world can do it in months, sometimes weeks. Why can every other country do it in that short a period of time? Are they all so much brighter than America? I don't think so.
Exactly. Some countries manage to hold decisive elections in just weeks, yet we're supposed to believe Americans need endless months to make up their minds? Give me a break. With this kind of thinking, the Democrats are exactly where they belong. In opposition. They refuse to accept the obvious. Their disastrous handling of the economy, out-of-touch policies, and outright ridiculous decisions are what landed them here. Americans aren't naive. They're smart, aware, and fully conscious of the fact that under Donald Trump, the economy, the border, and even their children's future felt more secure than under Biden and Harris. And let's be clear, it wasn't just about jobs or inflation. It was about leadership, security, and basic common sense. No matter who the Democrats put forward, whether it was Kamala, Newsom, or Whitmer, it wouldn't have changed a thing. Biden would have lost this election regardless. Because at the end of the day, the problem wasn't just one candidate, it was a failed administration pushing reckless policies completely detached from the reality everyday Americans face. The Democrats didn't lose because of Kamala Harris. They lost because their entire platform failed the very people they claim to represent. Until they accept that, they'll keep losing.